It was just after midnight when Jorge's car sputtered and died, coasting to a halt on the desolate road that cut through the marshlands. He gripped the steering wheel, muttering a curse under his breath. Outside, a heavy fog drifted in, blanketing the world in gray. There were no houses, no gas stations, only the hum of distant insects and the croak of a lone frog buried somewhere in the mist. He checked his phone. No signal. The battery hovered at 4%. Useless. He considered staying in the car until morning, but the thought of being stranded in the middle of nowhere, waiting indefinitely, made his skin crawl. With a sigh, he grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, zipped his coat up tight, and stepped out into the mist. The fog was thicker than it looked from inside the car, heavy and cold, muffling the sound of his footsteps on the gravel shoulder. It smelled damp, metallic, and faintly sweet, like decaying plants. As he walked, Jorge kept glancing over his shoulder, hoping for the reassuring glow of headlights in the distance. None came. He pressed on, flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through the mist. Every step made him feel more isolated, more certain that he shouldn't be here. Then he heard it. A whistle. It was soft and distant, carried on the breeze like a memory. At first, Jorge thought it might be a bird or maybe another stranded traveler, but the tune was strange, slow and off-kilter, as if the person whistling had forgotten the proper rhythm. He stopped and listened, squinting into the gray void. "Hello?" he called, voice thin against the dense mist. The whistle drifted closer, a lilting melody that seemed almost wrong. Something about it tugged at the edges of his mind, a quiet warning he couldn't place. The hair on the back of his neck bristled, but he shook off the unease. Maybe it was just his imagination. He was tired. Stress did funny things to people. "Hey, is someone out there?" No answer. The whistle stopped for a moment, and Jorge felt a flicker of relief, but just as he was about to keep walking, it started again, this time closer, impossibly close. His heart kicked into overdrive. He spun in a slow circle, flashlight jerking through the mist, but the beam revealed nothing but swirling fog. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, as if it led to nowhere. He told himself it was just a prank, some local kid messing with him, or maybe an animal mimicking a sound. That had to be it. Jorge forced himself to keep walking, picking up the pace. The whistle followed him, never hurrying, never lagging, just trailing him with a maddening persistence. Every time he tried to dismiss it, the tune seemed to twist, worming its way deeper into his head. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and fear. After what felt like hours, Jorge spotted the outline of a bus shelter up ahead. Relief washed over him. Finally, a place to rest, to gather his thoughts. He hurried toward the wooden structure, heart pounding. As soon as he stepped inside, the whistle stopped. He slumped onto the bench, rubbing his cold hands together. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing. Fatigue could do that. His mind was just playing tricks on him, warping ordinary sounds into something sinister. But as his breath slowed, his eyes wandered over the wooden planks of the shelter. There, scratched deep into the wood, were words, letters gouged in with something sharp, jagged, and frantic. "If you hear the whistle, never whistle back." A chill ran through Jorge, colder than the night air. His skin prickled with unease. Someone else had been here before him, someone who knew about the whistle. The message was a warning, and it had come too late. The whistle returned. It drifted through the mist, soft at first, but growing louder, closer, circling the shelter like a hunter closing in on its prey. Jorge's throat tightened, and his pulse raced. The warning carved into the wood flashed in his mind. Never whistle back. He clenched his fists, heart pounding. Was this a joke? An animal? A person? His fear teetered on the edge of anger, adrenaline giving him a fleeting sense of defiance. Why should he play along with this strange game? Before he could stop himself, he whistled back. A sharp, piercing note that rang out into the fog. For a moment, the night was deathly still. The fog seemed to thicken, wrapping tighter around the shelter like a shroud. Jorge's breath hung in the air, frozen. Then came the sound he feared most. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, crunching over gravel. They grew louder with each step, closer and closer, until they stopped just beyond the veil of fog. Jorge's heart pounded so hard it hurt. He strained to see, but the mist concealed everything. His flashlight flickered once, then sputtered out. A voice, low and rasping, whispered from the darkness. You shouldn't have done that. Jorge's blood turned to ice. He tried to move, to run, but his body refused to respond. It was as if the fog had seeped into his bones, locking him in place. Then he felt it. Cold fingers, skeletal and unyielding, wrapping around his wrist. He opened his mouth to scream, but the fog swallowed the sound. The next morning, a truck driver spotted Georgie's car abandoned by the side of the road. The door was wide open, keys still in the ignition. Curious, the driver pulled over and scanned the area. There was no sign of anyone, just the old wooden shelter sitting in the morning mist. As the driver approached the shelter, he noticed something strange. Fresh carvings scratched into the wood. "Never whistle back." The trucker stared at the words, an uneasy feeling settling in his gut. He glanced over his shoulder, the weight of the fog pressing close, and just as he turned to leave, he thought he heard something. A whistle. Faint and distant, carried on the mist, and it was coming closer.